June 2024 was marked by a series of economic and political events that will continue to shape investor sentiments towards sub-Saharan Africa. What does July hold for these countries, and what economic or political events will shape their economic landscape in the coming months? Well, Dumebi Oluwole, senior economist at Stears, joins me for more on this. Thank you, Dumebi, for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
Good morning to you too. Well, let's begin with an overview of economic and political events currently shaping investor sentiment towards the sub-Saharan countries. Let's take Nigeria, South Africa, Ghana, Egypt, and Kenya. I mean, we're going to be working with these 5 countries.
Yeah. I mean, if we just start off with what is currently happening, Kenya is at the top of the list right now from the finance bill that was recently withdrawn and the protests that followed. And how that right now Kenya is somewhat at a very critical juncture when you look at the fact that they just, Moody's just recently downgraded Kenya, and the Kenyan president as well is trying to take up a lot of, cost-cutting measures from the budget to ensure that at least they make some revenue to bridge their budget deficit. So that's for Kenya. Then you look at Nigeria. Still, we still have a lot of inflationary issues pervading the country, and you also look at the fact that fiscal authorities are beginning to somewhat come to the table, to support and complement what monetary policy authorities have been doing since the beginning of the year. We're seeing some level of initiatives to reduce import expenses, to somewhat support and reduce inflationary pressures, but we'll still delve a bit more into that later, because for now those measures are still not somewhat a market. The markets have not responded to those measures positively, because there's still a lot more to be done. Still in sub-Saharan Africa, looking at South Africa now, again, the election is still somewhat shaping the political and macroeconomic landscape for South Africa. This is because the coalition right now, that's the government national unity, it's still, they're still trying to make waves with that. They're still trying to make some progress with that. And up until when the markets see that they're going to make substantial strides, with all of the parties being happy and friendly to move on with their alliance, then we'd see a bit more positive market sentiment towards South African economy. Still in sub-Saharan Africa, we're looking at Ghana now. Again, from 2022 up until now, you'd see that Ghana has substantially turned the corner. Inflation has significantly declined, basically primarily due to base effects, but still we're seeing some level of monetary policy tightening and forward guidance there to significantly reduce inflationary pressures in the country. But still on the fiscal side of things, we're still seeing a little imbalances here and there. But I mean, the IMF, Ghana has moved forward with its debt restructuring agreements with its bilateral creditors and Eurobond holders, and so the additional funding from the IMF has come forward, and we might see some level of respite towards the Ghanaian economy. But going towards North Africa now, Egypt is the hot topic there, and we have seen a lot of I would say positive investor sentiment towards the Egyptian economy, and this is happening despite the issues that are happening around Egypt. That is the Israel-Gaza war. We're still seeing a lot of negative things happening around there, and yet Egypt has significantly been able to improve itself. So yes, that's like the broad overview happening in all of the 5 countries mentioned here today.
Thank you so much, Dumebi. That's a lot. Now let's look at Nigeria's performance in June, across vital macroeconomic indicators, and what your outlook is for July and by extension the quarter. I mean, I want us to look at whether it's currency, inflation, interest rates, and then output.
Yes, I mean, I'll start with the exchange rate. So basically, we still see that currency pressures would remain. And this is largely because, we haven't seen a lot of, support yet for the exchange rate. And remember now that the market is somewhat liberalized, right? So the market forces of demand and supply will continue to determine the rates, at least for the short term, except the CBN decides to intervene, which it has clearly stated that, it would likely not do as much, in the market. But against that backdrop, we're still seeing a lot of, positive, somewhat, I'll say bearish sentiment, towards the Nigerian FX market. And we expect that trend to continue. The exchange rate has traded at around 1,300 to around 1,500 plus, and we expect that trend to still continue in the near term. So basically, currency risks are still very, very prominent. Then you look at inflation. We still expect inflationary pressures to remain, but again, coming from last year up until now, base effects will substantially affect the upcoming July inflation numbers. For the June inflation numbers that will be coming out about, I think, next week on the 15th, base effects will not be so substantial there. So we might see the inflation rate, the headline inflation rate, marginally decline, but not substantially. And this is because when you look at what happened, the June inflation numbers in 2023, you see that it didn't substantially reflect the reforms that took place then. And so we won't likely see the June inflation numbers decline significant. So base effects will be more prominent from the July inflation numbers. Then you look at output growth. Again, because of the structural rigidities that we know are affecting Nigeria's production and productivity, from time past up until now, we still expect output levels to significantly decline. And we still expect output levels to significantly decline, or at least even remain very bearish. The real sectors of the economy are still struggling, from high import costs, high interest rates, and we expect that trend to continue. Now, speaking of the interest rate environment, when you look at the fact that right now the CBN has to keep tightening its monetary policy, we definitely still expect that trend to continue. At the beginning of the year, we did forecast that the central bank would have to increase interest rates by up to 1,000 basis points this year, cumulatively, and we're still maintaining that stance for Nigeria. So that pretty much sums it up for the outlook for Nigeria across these four indicators that I've mentioned now.
Well, talking about interest rates, I think it's mixed really, because you talked about the fact that you're expecting, the interest rate, or the CBN rather, to keep staying hawkish. But I've got some persons who say that we do not have enough headroom for that. We can't even take that anymore, irrespective of the moves that are now being, or let's say the policies that are now being churned out by the fiscal authority. What's your thoughts on that? Do you think we have the headroom for all of these? I mean, for another increase? We've had 750 basis points already. And we saw Dangote also complaining about 30% interest rate, saying that is not good for business. So do you see another hike in the offing?
I mean, I do see another hike, maybe not at the July meeting, but I still see that happening. To be very honest, the increase in the MPR is not the only way that we can, somewhat hedge against inflationary pressures in Nigeria. And the very reason why I say this is because and this is split two ways. And I'll start with the fact that we already know that Nigeria's inflation today is not substantially driven by, money supply, right? Even though we've seen that substantially increase up from December 2023 up until today. I think year on year, money supply growth has increased by over 70%. And that is definitely having some impact on inflationary pressures. But more importantly, we know that structural issues are what is currently driving inflation today. When you dissect Nigeria's inflation basket, you see that food alone accounts for about 52% of inflationary pressures in Nigeria today. And what exactly is driving that? We see the exchange rate. And what way can we substantially support investment inflows into the country right now from the monetary policy side of things? That's by increasing interest rates. While unfortunately, it is a trade-off, right? During inflationary periods like this, the expectation is that we need to bring in bring in investment into the country. We need to bring in dollar inflows into the country. Already investment sentiments towards Nigerian economy is very bearish. And how can we encourage investment inflows into the country? That's by allowing interest rates to remain high. It is a trade-off that has to happen from the monetary policy side of things. And to an extent, we've seen this, support at least foreign portfolio investment inflows into the country. The last capital inflows report, capital importation reports that was released for Q1 2024, we saw a substantial increase in capital inflows to the country by about 200% compared to, the previous quarter. And the driver of this increase was foreign portfolio investment inflows. And this is only because, interest rates are high and short-term investors know that they can garner, substantial yields from the economy. So again, from the monetary policy side of things, this is the only tool that the monetary policy authorities have at their disposal to encourage the kind of dollar inflows that we need to support the exchange rate and support the economy right now. But again, like I mentioned before, structural issues are the primary drivers of Nigeria's inflation today. So the monetary policy authorities can only do so much. And that's where the fiscal authorities come in. And that's why I did mention that even though we're seeing some moves by fiscal authorities to somewhat taper inflationary pressures, the markets have not been very receptive of it. And the reason is very simple. We're not doing enough to reduce Nigeria's inflation today, or at least increase output from the key sectors of the economy. Insecurity is still a threat, and that is substantially affecting our ability to produce food, and then again, increasing inflationary pressures. Then you also consider the fact that we're also not producing enough oil to give the refineries, or even boost our ability to refine enough crude oil to now supply the domestic economy with refined petroleum, and that again is keeping prices higher, right? So when you look at the key drivers of inflation in Nigeria today, even though monetary authorities are kind of doing what they're doing. Yes, the economy, is being affected, at least private sectors are affected. You understand that it's a trade-off that the monetary policy authorities have to make. The key thing here to also note, however, from the monetary policy side as well, because again, I've mentioned this from monetary policy side, I've also mentioned from the fiscal side. The monetary policy authorities, to avoid the economy overheating, and overheating basically in the sense that interest rates are rising too quickly for businesses to actually recover, which we're already saying, we'll definitely see some breaks, right? But to narrow that gap of inflation and interest rates have to still remain high. It's just a trade-off that has to happen right now for the Nigerian economy.
All right, Dumebi, I like what you said, when you were talking about capital importation and all of this. But even at the end of the day, when you do an analysis of that, you find out that a good percentage of it actually boils down to hot money. Yes. So is that even good news at the end of the day?
In the short term, it is. It's something that we're not very happy about as economists, but it's better than nothing right now. Foreign portfolio investments are coming into the country. Yes, it is hot money, but it is still money, right? And it is still dollars that are coming to the economy, and it is still money that we can use to do something right now, to somewhat support the currency, support monetary policy efforts, right? But the goal, however, is to ensure that we have more long-term investments. And again, this does not rest on the monetary policy authorities, right? It does rest on every other thing from the fiscal side of things. And a very good way to look at it is a company cannot come and set up shop in your country if there is still insecurity. They can't set up shop in your country if your policies, your fiscal policies can change overnight. They can't set up shop in your country if today you still have maybe ministers spending flamboyantly, the government not prioritizing how to improve consumption, improve consumer spending, improve the living standards of people that will end up consuming the product they're coming up to set up shop for. So while we're advocating for, we're looking at it like, okay, FPIs are not so good, they can easily take their money out. We still have to put our attention on the fact that it rests on the fiscal policy authority to do what is necessary to bring in the long-term capital.
All right, Dumebi, talking about the fiscal authority, we know that some measures have been put out, whether it's the PECC that has been inaugurated, or even the stabilization program that has now been approved, or even the, the whole construction and all of those things. So from where you stand, how much of an impact do you think Nigeria will be able to get from that?
I mean, when you look at the time frame that all of these things are supposed to happen, you see that they will move the needle just a little bit. But that's not enough, at least from where I stand. And the reason why I say this is this. When you take up painful economic reforms like this, the expectation is that everyone in the economy, both the political class, the poor, the households, everyone is feeling the pinch, right? And right now, with how the Nigerian government is spending, we don't see that yet, right? We are seeing reforms taking up a huge chunk of people's, income. Businesses are feeling the heat substantially, and the political class is still very much well-to-do. They're still spending as they will. I mean, we're seeing that they're going to remove, I think we have a 150-day, like you mentioned earlier, 150-day import freedom now, for lack of better words, to allow people bring in goods at a substantially cheaper rate. But that is still not enough. The exchange rate is still going to affect them. What exactly are we doing to give a longer break for more things to come into the economy at substantially cheaper rate? And then the government as well doing what it takes to cut their spending, right? We still, of late, I think the FCT minister recently inaugurated, or recently, I think, reopened the vice president's villa where they spent 20 billion naira. That does not give an FDI investor the notion that Nigeria is suffering. What it does tell them is that there is money, but it's just being spent in the wrong places, right? Meanwhile, people are suffering, So again, on the fiscal side of things, until they begin to see the government lean its spending substantially, FDI investors will continue to remain very bearish towards the Nigerian economy. And it's just that simple.
Right, but just before we close, I know we planned to talk about some countries, but let's look at South Africa now.
Yes.
What's your outlook for South Africa?
I mean, South Africa's economy is pretty much advanced more than the other African economies. So we do expect that the political landscape actually will continue to drive sentiments towards the South African economy. Again, up until they see a level of stability with the GNU coalition or GNU alliance that has taken place in the country to achieve substantial economic growth. So inflation for South Africa will remain steady at around 5 to 5.5%, and also exchange rate pressures will remain, but it would not be substantial to cause a lot of panic in the economy. So that's for South Africa.
Dumebi Oluwole, Senior Economist, Stears. Thank you for your time and your thoughts on the show today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.